The 1960s were a decade of rockets, paranoia, and imagination colliding on screen. But some visions went too far, films so bizarre, so unsettling, that government and even studios buried them. What made these strange works so dangerous? Were they merely bad dreams, or warnings too close to the truth? Tonight, we uncover 13 sci-fi films from the 60s that were banned for being simply too strange. 1. The Damned, 1963. On the surface, The Damned was just another Cold War parable, a British science fiction thriller directed by Joseph Losey. But beneath its modest exterior lay one of the most disturbing premises of the decade. The story follows an American tourist who stumbles into a gang of leather-jacketed bikers led by Oliver Reed. But that's just the surface chaos. Soon he discovers a group of pale, isolated children hidden away in a government facility. The children, it turns out, are radioactive, engineered survivors of an inevitable nuclear war. The concept was chilling enough, but the way Losey filmed it was even more unnerving. Shot in stark black and white with eerie performances, the movie blurred the line between youthful rebellion, government secrecy, and the annihilation of the future. When Columbia Pictures first saw the cut, executives panicked. The nuclear undertones, combined with its depiction of corrupted youth, struck far too close to real fears in Britain and abroad. Censors demanded cuts, delaying its release for years. In some countries, including the US, distributors barely allowed it into theaters, chopping whole sections and muting its political message. The result was a film that audiences hardly had the chance to understand. Critics at the time dismissed it as incoherent, without realizing much of its core had been butchered. But time worked in the film's favor. Rediscovered in later decades, The Uncut Damned revealed itself as a haunting, ahead-of-its-time story about the sacrifice of innocence in an age obsessed with survival. Today, it's hailed as one of Losey's hidden masterpieces. Watching it now, one can't help but shiver at how it reflects real fears of governments engineering future generations for catastrophe. The question remains, were those pale children only fiction, or a metaphor for truths we weren't ready to face? 2. The Green Slime, 1968. At first glance, The Green Slime looked like camp. A Japanese-American co-production with colorful costumes and rubbery monsters. It seemed like Saturday matinee fun. Astronauts travel to a space station after destroying an asteroid, only to discover alien spores that mutate into green, tentacled creatures feeding on electricity. On paper, it was silly. On screen, it was surreal. But the film's strangeness wasn't the problem. It was what lurked beneath the camp. Japanese director Kinji Fukasaku slipped in a cynical subtext about military arrogance and the futility of heroic sacrifice. The monsters kept, multiplying no matter what humans did, suggesting technology itself had birthed an unstoppable plague. Western distributors balked at the nihilism. When the film reached Italy and parts of South America, censors outright banned it, claiming its imagery of endless multiplying creatures was too disturbing for youth audiences. Behind the scenes, production had been chaotic. American and Japanese crews clashed over tone, design, and pacing. MGM executives tried to force the film into a family-friendly format, even commissioning a goofy theme song. The result was tonal whiplash, serious warnings about mankind's doom delivered by actors in garish spacesuits, battling what looked like glowing blobs. Audiences laughed it off in 1968. Critics called it one of the strangest failures of the genre. Yet, decades later, The Green Slime became a cult treasure, inspiring parodies on Mystery Science Theater 3000. Beneath the laughter, however, lies its unsettling vision. Mankind, arrogant and unprepared, unleashes forces it cannot contain. Watching its green monsters swarm across the station, one realizes this was less about pulp thrills and more about a nightmare we keep repeating. 3. Latitude Zero, 1969. Few films capture the sheer audacity of late 60s sci-fi like Latitude Zero, a Japanese-American collaboration directed by Ishiro Honda, famed for Godzilla. It presented a dazzling utopia beneath the sea, a hidden city powered by science and ruled by a benevolent genius, Captain Craig Mackenzie. He offers refuge to shipwrecked scientists while battling the sinister Dr. Malik, who unleashes mutant Batmen and grotesque monsters to destroy paradise. With its lavish sets and bizarre costumes, the film looked like a fever dream. Critics didn't know whether to take it as serious allegory or pure fantasy. The premise, a secret underwater utopia where nations' borders no longer exist, raised alarms. At the height of the Cold War, censors in both Japan and certain European countries worried the film was preaching a dangerous idea, that humanity should abandon nationalism entirely. Adding to the chaos, Latitude Zero suffered from a mismatched cast. American actor Joseph Cotten struggled with the outlandish dialogue, while Japanese stars played it with sincerity. Behind the scenes, translators scrambled, sets ran over budget, and the blending of East and West visions clashed constantly. By the time it released, distributors hacked away much of its political commentary, leaving a film many thought was just nonsense. But decades later, when collectors unearthed longer cuts, a different picture emerged. Latitude Zero wasn't simply pulp, it was a utopian dream that frightened governments invested in division. Its banning in some territories only confirmed its threat. The idea that peace and shared science might be more dangerous than war. Today, its campy monsters and shimmering underwater sets feel quaint, but the dream at its core remains radical. Watching it now, one wonders, were its Batmen really the monsters, or the fearful governments that silenced the dream? 4. The Terranauts, 1967. On release, The Terranauts was dismissed as cheap British sci-fi, a low-budget curiosity churned out by Amicus Productions. Critics mocked its cardboard sets and amateurish effects, but beneath its clumsy exterior lay a storyline that was far stranger, and ultimately too unsettling for some censors. The plot follows a group of British scientists monitoring radio signals for extraterrestrial life. Suddenly, they're whisked away to an alien asteroid base, where they discover tests of intelligence, strange alien guardians, and the looming presence of an ancient galactic empire. On the surface, it looked like an off-brand Doctor Who. But what unnerved audiences was its central idea, that humans were mere pawns in an interstellar experiment, judged by higher forces who may destroy them if they failed. British censors initially cut minor sequences they considered disturbing for children, but foreign distributors were harsher. In South Africa and parts of Eastern Europe, the movie was pulled entirely, with officials arguing its depiction of cosmic overlords undermined human dignity and Christian morality. Rumors spread that U.S. television syndicators refused to screen it, fearing accusations of anti-religious propaganda. Behind the scenes, the chaos was almost comedic. With a shoestring budget, the crew recycled sets from earlier films, while actors struggled with clunky dialogue. Yet the eerie emptiness of those cheap sets gave the film an accidental surrealism, an uncanny quality that left younger viewers especially disturbed. One British paper described the movie as innocent children's sci-fi turned nightmare. Over time, The Terranauts gained a second life, screened at midnight festivals where fans appreciated its eerie, dreamlike atmosphere. Scholars now argue it foreshadowed later works like 2001, A Space Odyssey. But stripped of Kubrick's polish, its message came across raw, frightening, and strangely prophetic. Watching it today, one can't help but feel the chill of its warning. What if humanity isn't in charge of its own destiny at all? 5. Creation of the Humanoids, 1962. When Creation of the Humanoids quietly premiered in 1962, most audiences didn't know what to make of it. With its low-budget sets, static camera work, and long philosophical dialogues, it hardly resembled a typical sci-fi film. But for those who stuck with it, the reward was shocking, a dystopian vision so radical that many territories outright banned it. Set in a post-nuclear future, the story imagines humanity nearly wiped out. To survive, humans build humanoid robots, identical in appearance but lacking souls. As the robots gain intelligence and push for equal rights, human extremists form violent groups to destroy them. The climax delivers an eerie twist. Many humans have already been replaced with android versions of themselves, their identities reconstructed without their knowledge. Censors balked. In the United States, Southern distributors rejected the film, claiming its allegory about integration and civil rights was too obvious. In Catholic countries, it faced bans for its unsettling message about souls, reincarnation, and the artificial replication of life. Rumors suggest that even in Britain, certain screenings were canceled after church groups protested. Behind the scenes, the film was written by Jay Sims, known for campier B-movies. Yet here, he leaned into allegory so heavily that critics compared the dialogue to stage plays. Some audiences were bored, others horrified. One critic at the time described it as a sermon disguised as science fiction. But decades later, its brilliance emerged. Ray Bradbury himself was rumored to have admired its themes. Today, Creation of the Humanoids is regarded as one of the most daring low-budget films of its decade. It predicted debates on artificial intelligence, cloning, and human identity. Questions still unresolved. Watching it now, its slow pace feels hypnotic, its questions eternal, and in its final haunting revelation, that humanity may already be obsolete, it remains as disturbing as the day censors tried to bury it. 6. First Spaceship on Venus, 1960. Few films illustrate Cold War paranoia as boldly as First Spaceship on Venus. A Polish-East German co-production based on Stanisław Lem's novel, it told the story of an international crew discovering an alien artifact that leads them to Venus. What they find there is shocking, the remnants of a once powerful civilization that destroyed itself with nuclear war. At first, it was celebrated as a milestone for Eastern Bloc cinema, showcasing lavish sets, inventive special effects, and a hopeful vision of international cooperation. But Western distributors saw something else, a propaganda weapon. When the film reached the U.S. in 1962, American censors hacked it to pieces, cutting dialogue that painted atomic weapons as the ultimate evil. In some places, the movie was shelved outright, with critics deriding it as communist indoctrination disguised as science fiction. Behind the scenes, tensions were just as fraught. The collaboration between Poland and East Germany was already political. Directors and designers debated endlessly over whether to emphasize optimism or despair. The final cut leaned darker, with chilling sequences of planetary devastation. Some audiences in Eastern Europe reportedly left theaters in tears, interpreting the Venusian apocalypse as a warning about their own government's nuclear ambitions. Ironically, the movie's banning in the West only added to its mystique. Bootleg copies circulated among Sci-Fi fans who whispered about its daring visuals and bleak message. For a generation caught between superpowers, First Spaceship on Venus felt less like fantasy and more like prophecy. Today, watching its surreal Venusian landscapes and eerie warnings, the film feels like a relic from an alternate history, one where cinema openly dared to confront the end of the world. And its banning, proof that sometimes the scariest truths aren't monsters, but mirrors. 7. Robinson Crusoe on Mars, 1964. At first glance, Robinson Crusoe on Mars looked like a pulp adventure, a classic survival tale reimagined on the Red Planet. Directed by Byron Haskin, who had helmed the War of the Worlds, it followed astronaut Christopher Draper, stranded after a crash, forced to survive with dwindling oxygen, scarce food, and an alien landscape hostile to human life. The premise was daring, but still within the realm of family science fiction. Yet when Draper encounters alien slavers, cold, faceless machines that hunt down humanoid captives, the tone shifted into something far stranger. Critics at the time noted the film's unsettling mix of survival drama and surreal allegory. The imagery of alien masters enslaving weaker beings resonated too strongly during the height of civil rights struggles in the U.S. and decolonization abroad. Though released in America with little issue, the film faced bans or heavy restrictions in South Africa, Spain, and several Latin American countries. Officials claimed it carried anti-authoritarian subtext and accused it of smuggling political messages under the guise of science fiction. In Spain, censors reportedly targeted the alien slave sequences, calling them dangerous and unfit for youth. Behind the scenes, the production itself was grueling. Filmed in Death Valley under brutal conditions, actors nearly collapsed from heat exhaustion. The Martian landscapes were convincing, but the toll was real. Some crew members joked that the desert itself was trying to kill them. For years, the film languished in obscurity, remembered mainly by genre fans. But in the 1970s, after renewed interest in Mars exploration, it resurfaced as a cult classic, its survivalist themes gained new relevance, and its allegory about oppression and endurance struck deeper chords. Today, its eerie landscapes and hushed atmosphere still haunt viewers. It reminds us that survival on alien soil is not just about air and water, but about facing the shadows of humanity itself. 8. Queen of Blood, 1966. When Queen of Blood appeared in 1966, it promised thrilling space adventure. Directed by Curtis Harrington, the film used lavish Soviet special effects footage, spliced with American actors, to tell the story of astronauts rescuing a mysterious alien woman from a crash. She was beautiful, silent, and mesmerizing, but she was also a vampire who fed on the crew. Audiences expecting pulp fun got something stranger, an eerie, dreamlike horror movie that blurred the lines between attraction and annihilation. The alien queen, with her glowing eyes and hypnotic presence, unsettled censors across Europe. In the UK, the film faced initial rejection, deemed grotesque and suggestive. In Italy, it was briefly banned for its corrupting combination of seduction and death. Even in the US, television syndicators hesitated to air it, fearing backlash from parents' groups. Behind the scenes, Harrington fought studio pressure to cut the most disturbing moments. He admired the Soviet footage, particularly its sweeping cosmic visuals, but knew splicing it with gothic horror was risky. Crew members whispered about tensions between American producers who wanted a marketable space adventure and Harrington, who leaned into surrealism. Critics dismissed it on release, calling it cheap exploitation. But over time, its strange atmosphere earned new respect. Directors like Martin Scorsese later praised Harrington as a visionary. The film became a midnight favorite, with fans reveling in its mix of dreamy space visuals and shocking violence. Today, Queen of Blood feels like a fractured nightmare. Half Cold War artifact, half art film. The bans it endured now seem ironic. By trying to bury it, censors only preserved its aura of danger. Watching it now, one can't help but wonder, was the alien queen truly a monster, or just a mirror of the hunger humans carry into the stars? 9. The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. Among 1960s sci-fi films, The Day the Earth Caught Fire stands as one of the boldest. Directed by Val Guest, it imagined a terrifying scenario. US and Soviet nuclear tests tilt the Earth off its axis, sending the planet spiraling toward the sun. What follows is not spaceships or aliens, but the unraveling of civilization itself. The film was hailed by critics in Britain for its stark realism. Shot partly in London during heat waves, with a gritty newsroom setting, it felt less like science fiction and more like a documentary of impending doom. Its reporters, scrambling for answers, mirrored the fears of an audience living daily with nuclear tension. But its blunt message, governments playing with atomic fire would destroy humanity, was too much for many countries. In Australia, censors cut entire sequences of panicked crowds, deeming them likely to incite unrest. In the United States, distributors delayed release and trimmed dialogue directly criticizing nuclear powers. In some conservative European states, it was outright banned, labeled politically dangerous. Behind the scenes, Val Guest insisted on authenticity. Real journalists were used as extras, and the production tapped meteorologists to give credibility. This realism, ironically, made the movie even scarier. Some viewers reportedly fainted during screenings, believing such a catastrophe not only possible, but imminent. The legacy of The Day the Earth Caught Fire grew stronger over time. In later decades, environmental movements reclaimed it as a prophetic warning about human arrogance and ecological collapse. Its final scene, church bells ringing, uncertain whether Earth would be saved, remains haunting. The bans only amplified its message, that the true terror of the atomic age was not invasion or monsters, but our own hubris. Watching it now, its smoky newsrooms and sun-scorched streets feel less like fiction and more like tomorrow's headlines. 10. Voyage to the End of the Universe, 1963. Known in its native Czechoslovakia as Icarie XB1, this film was one of the boldest Eastern Bloc sci-fi productions of the decade. It followed a crew aboard the spaceship Icarie on a decades-long mission to a distant star. Unlike American space films, It emphasized psychological strain, philosophical questions, and eerie encounters in the void. To Western critics, the movie was strikingly sophisticated. Its stark production design and moody atmosphere anticipated 2001, A Space Odyssey. But it was also deeply unsettling. In one sequence, the crew discovers a derelict ship filled with the corpses of gamblers, their bodies floating in weightless silence, poisoned by their own decadence. For many audiences, the mix of nihilism and surrealism proved disturbing. When the film was exported, things got stranger. In the US, it was retitled Voyage to the End of the Universe and drastically re-edited. Dialogue was cut, philosophical reflections stripped away, and a tacked-on ending suggested the ship had actually reached Earth. Critics derided the American version as incoherent, while the original was banned in several conservative countries for its bleak tone and veiled critiques of Cold War powers. Behind the scenes, production was equally fraught. Soviet officials reportedly pressured the filmmakers to emphasize optimism, while director Jędrzej Polak pushed for darker, more ambiguous storytelling. The compromise produced a film that was both visionary and politically dangerous. Today, cinephiles treasure the restored version of Icaria XB1. It stands as one of the most sophisticated European sci-fi films of its time. The bans it endured only highlight its daring message, that humanity's greatest journey might not be toward discovery, but toward confronting the emptiness within ourselves. 11th Night of the Big Heat, 1967. Starring horror icons Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, Night of the Big Heat was marketed as a standard British creature feature, but what unfolded was stranger, slower, and more unnerving. The story is set on a remote island experiencing an unnatural heat wave. As temperatures rise, the villagers realize they are being invaded, not by visible monsters, but by invisible extraterrestrials who thrive on heat and energy. Audiences expecting thrills grew uneasy at its suffocating pace. The heat became the villain, pressing down on every scene. By the time the alien menace is revealed, the atmosphere is so oppressive that it feels less like a monster movie and more like a fever dream. Censors in Southern Europe and parts of Asia found its imagery disturbing. The notion of invisible invaders, unseen forces draining life and will, was labeled psychologically harmful. In Spain, it was briefly banned, with officials calling it corruptive paranoia. Rumors claim that in some rural UK theaters, audiences walked out, convinced the film had cursed the weather itself. Behind the scenes, production was plagued by sweltering studio conditions that mirrored the on-screen heat. Actors sweated under hot lights, their discomfort genuine. Lee and Cushing reportedly joked that the real monster was the production schedule. Yet that raw discomfort lent the film authenticity. Decades later, the movie gained cult status, its slow-burn terror appreciated by fans of atmospheric horror. Watching it now, the invisible aliens feel less like creatures and more like metaphors, unseen forces of climate, war, or fear itself. Its banning reminds us how fragile audiences were when confronted not with monsters they could see, but with threats that might already surround them. 13. The Power, 1968. George Pal, the visionary producer behind The Time Machine, shocked audiences with The Power, a film that seemed straightforward but unraveled into nightmare. The story begins with a group of scientists testing human potential, but when one of them reveals psychic powers beyond comprehension, the narrative turns into a paranoid thriller. Colleagues vanish, minds are manipulated, and reality itself bends under invisible control. Critics described it as sci-fi noir, dark, unsettling, and laced with paranoia. Audiences expecting Pal's optimism were horrified by its ambiguity. Who was in control? Could anyone resist? Its surreal sequences, characters melting into hallucinations, minds shattering under psychic assault, disturbed censors in Italy, Spain, and Latin America. Some claimed it was too frightening for general audiences, while others feared it suggested governments could never control those with such powers. Behind the scenes, Pal clashed with MGM executives who demanded clarity. He refused, leaving in surreal sequences that baffled test audiences. Rumors say the studio wanted to bury the film, releasing it with little promotion. As a result, it flopped at the box office. But over time, The Power gained a reputation as one of Powell's strangest works. Its influence echoed in later films about psychic warfare, from Scanners to Firestarter. Watching it now, one realizes why it was so unsettling in 1968. It wasn't the effects or the story. It was the suggestion that true power lies not in weapons, but in the human mind, invisible and unstoppable. The bans it faced feel almost symbolic. An attempt to control what the film itself warned was uncontrollable. The most terrifying power, it reminds us, is the one we cannot see. From radioactive children to psychic overlords, these banned films of the 1960s remind us that the strangest visions often cut the deepest. They weren't just entertainment, they were warnings, sometimes too raw for their time. Like, subscribe and share your thoughts, because the strangest stories are never truly gone.